Welcome to the Plain Talk Podcast. I'm Rob Port, your host. As always, coming up a little bit later in the show, yesterday I had an interview with Senator Jessica Unruh. Now, Senator Unruh is backing legislation concerning pore space, and again, I realize this is a Byzantine issue, but it's a hot issue, and it really reflects a lot on a lot of very important policies for North Dakota. Things like flaring, things like oil and gas production, things like, well, frankly, even the coal industry and carbon sequestration. There's a little bit of a food fight going on between landowners on one side who want to be compensated and treated fairly when the energy industry uses their property or uses what they believe to be their property for things like disposing of salt water or sequestering natural gas instead of flaring it or sequestering carbon emissions. On the other side is the industry that says, listen, if we go too far down this road, we're going to inhibit our ability to develop these things in the first place and to innovate and improve our industry. So it's an important debate. And again, you heard from Senator Jessica Unruh yesterday, who is a sponsor of the legislation. Now, today, on today's show, Troy Coons from the Northwest Landowners Association giving the other side of that debate. But before we get to the interview, here's a little bit of a rant. Now, the legislature, specifically the North Dakota House, has now rejected a proposal to expand the size of North Dakota's State Board of Higher Education. You'll remember coming into the session, Governor Doug Burgum had created a task force. I think their original recommendation was to split the State Board of Higher Education into multiple entities. I think it started with, I think we would have ended up with like 4 entities. It would have been a governing board for North Dakota State University, a governing board for the University of North Dakota, a governing board for the other 9 public institutions in the North Dakota university system, and then a sort of unifying board sitting above all of them. And that idea was, the argument behind that was that the North Dakota university system has grown so large that it cannot be governed by the existing board. Therefore, we need more boards. Now, I don't know that a lot of people bought into that, and certainly as reflected by the legislature voting down, that proposal kept getting watered down. First, instead of having one board each for NDSU and UND, they went to one board for both of the universities, the 2 research universities, and then a second board for the other 9, and then that got rejected. So then we went for just expanding the existing board, and now that proposal has been rejected, and it seems unlikely we're going to reform governance of the university system at all this legislative session. But part of me wonders if we're not, well, not part of me. In fact, I firmly believe that we are not addressing the real problem in the university system. I think there's some things we could do in terms of maybe making it easier for the members of the State Board of Higher Education to govern, right? Remember that the State Board of Higher Education, the university system, is essentially sort of a 4th branch of state government. They don't have any direct oversight from the legislature. They don't have any direct oversight from the governor. The governor appoints the members of the State Board of Higher Education, but they don't serve at his pleasure. He can't fire them once they're there. The legislature can't fire them. The legislature can certainly try to influence things through funding and through policy, but generally it's hands off for them too. I think this is part of the problem, and I think, isolating the university system from our governance structure, our democratic governance structure in the state, has not been a good thing for the university system. Others argue that it keeps politics out of the university system, which I have to laugh at, because is there any part of state government that's more political than the North Dakota university system? Because it looks pretty darn political to me. But setting that aside, I think there are some things we could do with the State Board of Higher Education in terms of maybe we make the members of the State Board of Higher Education full-time. Maybe we pay them more. I mean, right now, they really don't get a lot of compensation for that time. It is a tough job. It's a lot of travel. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of agendas. I don't think people realize how much work that they do. It is a big job, and we don't pay them much. Essentially, it's almost a volunteer position. It's a part-time position. Maybe we need to change some of that. Maybe we need to pay them a little bit more. Maybe we even need to make those positions full-time. I'm not sure. I think we could do some of that, but even that I think would be a tweak. I think what ails the university system is not a structural problem, but a philosophical problem, an attitude problem. Now when I look at the universities, I see institutions that should serve the state, right? The public universities, as much as sometimes I think the proponents of the universities, up to and including some of the university presidents themselves, don't like to believe this, but they belong to the state. They're not some separate institution. These are public institutions. The people who work there are state employees. They work for the state. Those are taxpayer-owned institutions. If they were private institutions, that would be different. But they're not. They were founded by the state. They're funded by the state. Not just directly, but in all sorts of ways. I mean, you look at some of the programs we do through the Bank of North Dakota to facilitate student loans. I mean, we do a lot to subsidize higher education that's outside of maybe just the regular general fund appropriations that we're all familiar with. So they should serve the state, these institutions. And when I say serve the state students. The state has an interest in educating our students, right? I mean, not only do we want to enrich our society and enrich our people, but we also want people who are able to take skilled jobs in our state economy. I mean, those are all parts of the pie. And so we're served well by better educating our students and affording them opportunities for all sorts of avenues for study. That's a good thing. Our state also has research needs, right? We have industries here that benefit from research into better ways to drill an oil well, better ways to farm a piece of land. There's all sorts of research that can take place, and frankly, that is taking place at our universities. But those are the two missions, right? Educate our kids and promote research that benefits our state. That's what these institutions should be doing. Sadly, I think what happens a lot of times is those interests take a back seat to other interests. I think in the administration at some of these universities, there's a feeling that we just want to build bigger campuses, right? More buildings, bigger campuses, more people. It's empire building. It's university presidents that just want bigger fiefdoms to preside over. I think that there's an element of sports fans that get involved here, right? They start to see the local university not so much as a way to educate kids and to facilitate research that benefits our state, but as a host body for a sports program. Maybe it's football, maybe it's hockey, maybe it's basketball, whatever your favorite flavor is. I think there's a section of the public that sees it that way. And then there's economic interests around the campuses as well, right? Because the campuses bring a lot of people into the communities. I mean, some thousands of people. I mean, by the time you start counting up students, by the time you start counting up faculty and administrators, and then maybe all the secondary people, maybe the spouses of the faculty and administrators. I mean, there's sort of an industry unto themselves, right? And they drive a lot of commerce. All those students coming into town, well, they order a lot of pizza and they buy a lot of beer and they go out to bars and they eat in restaurants and their parents come and visit and they stay in hotel rooms and, well, it's a big, big business. And so there's a lot of development that happens around our campuses, right? So now you've got real estate development, you've got business. And those economic interests, well, they swing a big stick too. And so I think what has happened is in North Dakota, and this is not unique to North Dakota. I think this is a problem across the nation. We have developed an attitude about higher education that it's not just to serve the education interests of the students, and it's not just to serve the research needs of our state and society at large, right? To expand human knowledge. So we also got to make sure people are ordering a lot of pizzas. And we got to make sure that butts are in seats for football games and all these other things. And now a group of people who are tasked with what is really I don't want to call it a simple mission because it's not simple, but a mission that is smaller in scope, educate the students, facilitate research, now becomes, well, run a successful collegiate sports business and, make sure that the local interests in Fargo or Grand Forks or Minot or Williston or whichever public institution we're talking about, that they're served as well and people are buying enough pizzas and everything else. I think that's the problem. We have diluted our interests. We have diluted philosophically. We're approaching this the wrong way. And so I'm not sure, as long as these attitudes exist about our universities, I'm not sure anything's going to change, right? I'm not sure it matters what structure we're using to govern the universities, if it's one board or three boards or four boards, or maybe the people are elected, or maybe they're appointed by the governor but can be removed, or maybe they're full-time, or maybe they're part-time. I'm not sure any of that really is going to make a difference until we as a society get back to valuing what higher education is supposed to be, which is education. Not football teams. Not economic development, not hockey teams, none of that stuff. It's supposed to be about education. It's supposed to be about expanding knowledge. But sadly, I think a lot of times those take a back seat. My interview with Troy Coons coming up next. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. Troy Coons joins me now. Now, Troy is, how would you're a member of the Northwest Landowners Association, which is exactly what it sounds like, a group representing landowners in the northwestern part of the state, which of course is where the bulk of North Dakota's oil and gas development happens. And Troy, would you say you're a founder of the group, or what's your title?
I am the current chairperson, and I am one of the founding members of the organization. And we actually do have members across the whole state of North Dakota. We gave it that name many years ago, but we have members all across the state, and some of our members actually are in 26 states that are extended family that have property in the state.
Now, I think people who read the news media in the state probably see your name and see your group's name mostly as it relates to energy issues, right? So oil development, gas development. We're going to, in a moment, talk about Senate Bill 2344, which on yesterday's episode, I had Senator Unruh on. She's the primary sponsor of the bill, and she, of course, made the affirmative argument for it. Your group opposes it, and we're going to get into that. But with members across the state, is it just oil and gas development? What sort of issues do you guys work on?
We were actually, when we founded it, was about wind energy. That's what founded us, was not oil and gas, it was wind. And so we deal with wind. You know, we had bills this session for wind. We do public forums on just education, from your plot mapping for easements to wind to water, oil and gas. Seems like, currently it's been oil and gas more.
Yeah, well, I mean, that makes sense given how much of it we're doing these days, which is a great thing for our state. Now, I know previously when I had, conversations with you, that was one thing that you said is your membership is generally pretty much in favor. I mean, let's go get the oil, let's go get the gas, let's do it. We want the industry here. They're doing great things for our state. It's just, while we're doing it, your constituency, your groups, you have a point of view and you want to make sure that your interests are protected as well, correct?
At no point have we been anti-oil and gas. We're completely for that. Our members, are surface members. We have surface mineral members. We have mineral members. So we are for it. And we just want it to be as fair and balanced as we can. And that's what we work for. Our mission is we are about education and information.
Now, Senate Bill 2344, and I said this while I was interviewing Senator Unruh, every time I start explaining what this bill is to people, their eyes start glazing over because it's a little Byzantine, right? I mean, it's a little complicated what we're talking about. But essentially, the way Senator Unruh described it is she said that we had a certain way of doing business in our state. The Supreme Court came along and in a certain case changed things. And so this bill is about getting things back to the way they were. Now, I'm trying to I realize that I'm speaking very simplistically, but I'm really trying to help people understand what this is. The bill does a lot of things, but specifically one of the big things it does is regarding pore space. Now, my understanding is that pore space belongs to the surface right owner, and what the industry wants to do is they want to be able to use that pore space to do things like, say, store natural gas. Instead of flaring it off, we re-inject it down into the pore space. It doesn't get burned up and release emissions into the atmosphere. Everybody wins. Or disposing salt water, for instance. I mean, these are things they want to use that pore space for. And, she essentially says that this doesn't violate any rights. But Troy, your group, and I'll let you explain this, your group says that the way the bill is formulated, it amounts to essentially a taking. Tell us what's going on. And correct me if I got any part of this wrong.
Well, you're right. Even when I'm working at the Capitol and with the public, this is a very complex bill. It truly should have been 4 bills, and it should have been worked on for 18 months with landowners involved in the development of it. Was one of the first errors in the bill. And the complexity is, you got natural gas flaring. Well, farmers and ranchers, generally, we are, stewards of our land and our resources. We don't like to see that either. We're not against enhanced oil recovery, which is a use for CO2 in the oil industry. Then you have the coal folks that need a place to put CO2. That's another element to this. Then you have
and just interject
water.
there. That's what you're talking about is taking the CO2 emissions and instead of releasing them into the air, injecting them back in. The oil industry wants to use it, basically to help push more oil out of the ground. To put it simply, the coal industry is looking at it as a way. I think that's the carbon sequestration, right? Just to stick it in the ground
Correct.
instead of releasing it in the air. So those are some of the things we're talking about, where of course pore space becomes important.
That's correct. So you got those elements. Then you have the saltwater brine, which can go in a spacing unit and downhole, or it can go off the spacing unit. So right there, you got a lot of different elements that all have different nuances to them. Then you have where they change the definition of land, and then they have the very last portion of this bill takes away the right to sue for nuisance and trespass. And in a free market system like we have currently, all of the things they are talking about can be done. I mean, Red Trail Energy is out there working on getting contracts to sequester CO2. So they see that there is a value for the pore space. For years and years, people have been paid, say, 10 cents a barrel to put saltwater brine downhole into the pore space. So this here is a way to help with our flare problem, which they're not meeting the requirements that our organization was on that task force for years, setting those levels, which I agree and I get that. As the other day I was at the Industrial Commission meeting, and we're going to meet where there'll be less flaring for just a brief second, and then it's going to go up again. We have pressure building in some of these injection wells for salt water, so that's an issue. You do have the issue of if there's an injection well and the salt water migrates maybe to another owner. So that's another issue. So this bill, if you look at the Moser v. Denbury case, the Supreme Court kind of upheld the way the law is currently and ruled in the property owner's favor. Currently, the Fisher Continental case is other litigation where Continental basically, is fighting with the Fishers that they don't feel they have to pay for the pore space. If this bill passes, in our opinion, and this bill was large enough to our group, we didn't work with one lawyer or two. It was complex enough that we've reached out to 5 law firms, 3 in North Dakota, 1 in Montana, 1 in Wyoming, which in totality we had 9 lawyers review this, and they come up with the conclusion, that it's a constitutional issue and a taking. So with that many lawyers that work in this space, we had to stand strong and try to educate the public and educate the representatives and senators on what was taking place here.
Again, the bill is Senate Bill 2344, and I'd encourage you to look it up and read it for yourself. Now, this bill has passed in the state Senate. It has passed in the state House. It is now before a conference committee, and essentially, if you're not familiar with the legislative process, that is where when the Senate and House take up a bill, they have the opportunity to amend it. So what can sometimes happen is when a bill comes from the Senate over to the House will make amendments to it, and they end up with a different version of the bill than what the Senate passed. And so a conference committee is essentially a committee with members from each chamber where they get together and they say they try to negotiate on those changes. And then once they reach a sort of a compromise bill, a unified bill, if you will, then the bill goes back to get approved by each chamber, or sometimes just one, depending on how it goes, if maybe the other chamber is going to accept. But regardless, this bill is before a conference committee. And when I spoke with Senator Unruh, she said, because what you were talking about is, well, there should have been a longer process, and landowners should have been more involved. Her message was, I hope they come to the table, and maybe we can get some of the changes they want in the conference committee. Is that an opportunity, Troy? I mean, why not? I mean, do you not see it possible to get what you want in this bill?
Well, just to explain a little more, and as you said earlier, when a person sits down and explains this bill, I think it's human nature. Our mind kind of shrinks down to the one element of it we can understand, and we don't address the rest.
Sure.
Very few people I've discussed this with can explain the bill in totality. We have had all these lawyers look at it, and if you got one that comes up with a way to amend, I got 5 others tearing it apart. I definitely, if you look at our organization's history, again, it's to inform and educate. We've never bashed anybody. We've never thrown stones. It's just not who we are. We're guys that are trying to educate people on what we see. We put on educational meetings. Would I like to see something happen? Yes. I don't know how to do that when this is one bill because, again, it should have been 3 or 4. If we could take out where they're redefining land and take out where we can't sue for trespass, those are 2 huge parts. We did offer to set policy because they said they wanted to set policy, so we made that offer, and they rejected that, not the conference committee, but the House Energy and Natural Resources Subcommittee. And then we did offer to do a study, which this is complex enough. We thought there should be a study. The Moser case happened a few years back, and it wasn't a panic. I don't think it's a panic right now because currently you're injecting salt water. The coal people are out there making contracts to sequester CO2. So the free market system can work. It does work. It's just the few here are going to carry the burden for the many. And we haven't even talked about what other elements we might want to sequester someday. Is it hydrocarbon sequestration? Will nuclear waste go into the pore space? What other elements haven't we even thought about yet that this could have an effect on? And the precedent setting of the taking.
Yeah. I mean, some of that's a little bit of the slippery slope fallacy. I mean, you throw out a term like radioactive waste. I mean, that sounds scary, certainly, but we can have a debate about that. I mean, nothing here is authorizing that yet. There would have to be a greater shift to allow that sort of thing to happen. But so there's no changes you think that could be made to this current bill that could make it acceptable to your group to pass this session? Because I think what the legislature, what the oil industry is saying is, listen, the Supreme Court came in here, their ruling changed the way we're doing business. And again, Senator Unruh reiterated this. She said, we're just trying to get back to the way we've been doing business for a long time prior to the Supreme Court stepping in. Was there something wrong with the way things were going back then?
I think there's confusion in those statements because I think the Supreme Court just reaffirmed what we are doing. We are injecting, and the surface owner, which owns the pore space, is getting compensated. There is some concerns there of, say, saltwater brine going downhole and it's migrating, and there could possibly be liability issues there for industry. One of the other concerns is if the state does this, then it's going to transfer the liability from industry to the state because they'd be the ones that would be taking on the liability, not the industry. And that's a scary thing, too. And I don't know how that would even work with, your state lands. It's very complex. Like I said, we've had a multitude of people looking at it. I'm going by their advice, and the novice's read of it reaffirms that. I wish we would have been more to the forefront, even on the Senate side, So that's a little bit of a shame on us, too, that we didn't have a clearer grasp on it. But it was that confusing that we didn't grasp all of it early on either.
So what happens if I guess I'm trying to figure out, because I would like to come, if we can, to a compromise, right? I mean, I'd like to produce policy that the landowners are feeling good, because this was something I said to Senator Unruh, is the oil industry, I don't think, wants to just steamroll people, right? Long term, I don't think that's a strategy that works. If you the oil industry needs to work with the landowners in western North Dakota, not just to respect their property rights, but to have a good relationship there so that the industry is welcome in their communities and everybody can go about their business. And, you know, that's the whole purpose of politics, right? Is none of us are an island in this society. You live your life the way you want to live it, but that life is going to intersect with other people. And at those intersections, we need public policy to regulate those interactions, to make sure that people are treated fairly, et cetera, et cetera. So the industry, I think they need to be careful not to upset landowners and create a situation where even if they win at the legislature, maybe it's a sort of Pyrrhic victory because they lose a lot of goodwill among landowners. So I can understand that. But I think the industry's rebuttal to that is, listen, we don't – I think they're afraid of some consequences here if the law isn't changed in the wake of the Supreme Court ruling. They're afraid of some consequences that could hurt their ability to continue operating in our state.
I guess our history and my history, you'll never find any place that I've badmouthed anybody. I don't believe in that. It's to find an understanding of both sides and both give a little bit and come up with the best thing we can for all involved. That's my personal nature. That's the organization, how we are. I wish I could find a way to amend this. And like I said, I've looked and I've looked. I wish we could break it apart into several bills. I wish we could make it a study. I wish we could set policy. But I am definitely willing to sit down with them and work on that. I know all those people well. I'm hoping we can do it. It's just, as you said, even when I'm working with representatives and senators and you explain it in your understanding and they try to explain it in their understanding, there's very, very few people I think truly understand. And that's a little scary when you don't have a clear picture of what the legislation will totally do. I don't want us to have a look back and have bad feelings there. And for me, as the chairman of this group, I feel like I have the sun on the back of my neck with a lot of upset farmers and ranchers and property owners that they're very heated over it. We got to get along because the oil play is good for North Dakota. I mean, it's good, and I don't want to see that inhibited, but I don't want to see it at the burden of the surface owner either. It's got to be balanced.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. So, in your mind, in your mind, what's the best possible outcome this legislative session? I mean, you said you're willing to sit down. Senator Unruh said they'd like to see you guys at the table during the conference committee negotiations. Have you engaged there? I mean, do you see anything fruitful in coming to there?
Well, I'm hoping to be. I'm going to reach out to her later today again and see if we can and have a visit. And I try to do all this without a lot of emotions and do it on a friendly basis because you have things you work on tomorrow. We'll be working on an eminent domain case, so we'll be working on our legislation, and you'll be working on other things. So you have to have that relationship to do good things. I would, how do I say this? The surface owner carries quite a brunt of some of the development, and they don't get a lot from the development a lot of times unless they have the minerals. And so to pull this out and reduce another avenue for them to be compensated, this bill was amended, and the amendment pulled out a small sliver of folks that have existing saltwater disposal wells and to help them retain their current contracts until they would expire to get some payments in the future. There's no way for these people or other people, say you take saltwater brine off of this spacing unit, go 20 miles away and you want to dispose over here, to enforce getting paid if you take away the right to sue for trespass. So the use of the pore space, some people say it ain't being used. but it is an ownership issue there. It's a small piece, like if you say 10 cents a barrel in disposal of salt water when you're looking at a $50 barrel of crude, to compensate them. I know other people are saying different things, but that's where our legal advice from a multitude of lawyers and law firms are saying we're headed, and the transfers liability to the state. But I do want to sit down and work on it. In no fashion do I want to do anything else. And I know people have been saying other things out there. That's never been our history. We've never said anything derogatory or negative. It's just not how we do stuff.
Well, I've certainly never, and I follow this stuff closely. I know people say a lot of things, and there's been people saying a lot of things about Senator Unruh as well, and some of the supporters of the bill, and I think that's unfortunate. And in a complicated issue, finding resolution is hard enough without people throwing pies at each other. So hopefully we'll get there. Go ahead, Troy.
And I want you to know that, I believe people come forward with this with good intent.
Yeah.
But I think it was one person had good intent, and another person had, and another person had, and another person had, and all of a sudden, I remember last session before, there was different bills that had 3, 4, 6, 7 elements to them, and a bunch of good things can end up having some bad things involved, and that's what I feel happened here.
Yeah. Well, we'll see how it comes out, and Troy, I hope you'll keep me in the loop, and we'll have you back on the show, because I have a feeling that whatever happens this legislative session, this issue's probably not going away.
Well, I wanted to thank you for what you do and your education of people, and that's what we feel we do, is try to inform and educate as well. So thank you.
That's it for today's Plain Talk Podcast. A favor, if you would, if you're listening to this on a platform that allows you to rate and review the podcast, if you would leave an honest rating and an honest review, I would appreciate it. The more ratings and reviews a podcast gets, it kind of helps elevate the podcast through the ecosystem of podcasts that are out there. And these days, well, there are a lot of them. Although maybe not so many covering North Dakota politics specifically. But still, I would appreciate it. If you have any trouble listening to this podcast on any platforms, I've helped several people, get a lot of you have emailed looking for the podcast on different platforms. We've gotten added onto those platforms. I've been able to maybe help troubleshoot some problems people are having. I know for a lot of you, the podcast is a new medium. Email me, rob@sayanythingblog.com. I'm happy to help. If you have any feedback on the show, use that email address as well. Or if you have questions for our weekly guest, Senator Kevin Cramer, Congressman Kelly Armstrong, well, of course, email them to rob@sayanythingblog.com. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter. You can find me. Just search for my name. I'm at Rob Port on Twitter. Say Anything Blog has a Facebook page and a Twitter profile as well. So be sure to check that out if you want to follow all of my posts and print columns and these podcast episodes in all those different ways. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.